This is the story of a beautiful and rich couple, about a young American Joe and a beautiful Russian Olga. They managed to get married and went to the Virgin Islands to spend their honeymoon on the beach there. It was a heavenly place, and life seemed perfect. However, the happy lovers had no idea that the reverse report had been launched, and they had only 107 days of family happiness left. The Connell family lived in Wilmington, Delaware, USA. The family had 3 children, but later the parents divorced, which was a blow to everyone. The children stayed with their mother. The eldest child's name was John, the middle one was Joseph, and the youngest was a girl named Kelly. It was a rather noisy group in childhood, which often quarreled over trifles, but when they grew up, the children found a common language and were generally very friendly. His mother also got together with another man, who became like a second father to them. The family's life took place in a comfortable and peaceful neighborhood. They were wealthy enough to grow up freely and not deny themselves anything. The middle son, Joseph, whom everyone close to him called Joe, matured and became an enterprising guy. Sometimes he was too correct and meticulous, but it was always about the case. In general, he could be called a funny guy. The king of parties, he always raised the level of fun in any company and was very sociable. Joseph was doing well. He was a co-owner of a car service and store along with one of his best friends named Christopher. Their partnership was successful. They were passionate about their business and developed the business. During this period, Joseph met Olga on the internet, a young woman from Russia. They were already over 30 years old. Both had previously been burned in a relationship and were looking for love. The young people quickly found a common language, as both had friendly and bright personalities, for which everyone loved them. Joe was a confirmed bachelor. He just didn't think that he would meet such a beautiful blonde in his life, who would completely turn his life and beliefs around. They began to communicate every day. We spent hours together online and became so close that the woman came to the United States directly from Siberia. Joseph was not disappointed when he met her in person. The man was fascinated by Olga's beauty and gentle, easygoing nature. It was mutual. The woman also liked Joseph. They started dating, and their relationship developed rapidly. Joseph's family quickly fell in love with the Russian beauty, with whom their son was literally inseparable. She seemed very gentle and vulnerable, but behind her shyness was a very energetic and enterprising woman who could do anything. The whole family loved her. It seemed like she was the only one who could really make the middle son of the family settle down. Naturally, she came to America for a reason. The man promised to marry her, so pretty quickly the Conns decided to have a wedding. It was from this moment that the problems began in the relationship. The first controversial issue was the wedding ring. Traditionally, the mother of the family wanted to give her jewelry to her son, but at that time, it had already been given to her daughter Kelly. My sister got married 10 years before the events described. It was an expensive wedding ring, which cost about $20,000 US, made of diamond inlay. Joseph took the jewelry from his sister and imperceptibly replaced the stones with cubic zirconia, after which he returned it to Kelly, and the diamonds were inserted into a new setting of a Brutus ring that was presented to Olga, and then they were supposed to be replaced with cubic zirconia, and the precious stones returned to her sister's ring. None of the women were supposed to notice. Of course, no one intended to deceive Kelly. They planned to return everything to her, but the case dragged on. My sister did notice the difference between the stones, and this action caused her displeasure. She expressed her indignation to her brother, who was very upset. He believed that his sister wanted to break family traditions, and he got angry because of this. The wedding ceremony took place in the Virgin Islands, United States of America. However, the groom's sister was not present at the event. Email delayed in the going because I was offended by the couple and was working that day. Nevertheless, she took the time to send a few pointed messages to Olga, which concerned her wedding ring. At that time, the bride had no idea what Joseph had done with the jewelry to make such a wedding gift, so Kelly's rudeness greatly spoiled the joy of the moment. From that time on, Constant quarrels and altercations began between the brother and sister. It was only a few weeks after the wedding when someone broke into the young couple's house while the couple were at work. The attacker stole a large amount of jewelry as well as family heirlooms. However, at that moment, the Connell family diamond ring was on Olga's finger, so it was saved. After discovering the home invasion, Joseph called the police. Law enforcement officers examined the scene and started searching for the robber. Surprisingly, the criminologists did not find any evidence. If the robbery really happened and was not staged, then the attacker was clearly a professional in criminal matters. However, they were not destined to bring this case to an end, because a much more serious crime that happened to this couple loomed on the horizon. Unfortunately, fate decreed that they were not destined to live happily ever after. The beginning of their life together was in the Virgin Islands, which are located in the Caribbean, where they celebrated their honeymoon after the wedding. Here they enjoyed each other, the sea, and the sun. The couple fished, rode a yacht on turquoise waves, and tasted fine cuisine. The family really had more than enough money. That's why they didn't deny themselves anything during their honeymoon. After flying back home, the young Connell family got a Mercedes worth more than $100,000. It was a brand new convertible that the head of the newly minted family could afford due to the fact that he was a co-owner of a rapidly developing car company. The business brought in about $1 million a year. Olga was a former stock trader, so she knew economics, finance, and the principles of working with clients perfectly well. The woman quickly became part of her husband's business, acting as an administrator. The attractive blonde Russian with an accent was sweet, friendly, and personable, and helped develop the common cause. Everything was fine until one day when the irreparable happened. On September 2013, just 3 months after the wedding, shots were fired at the couple's home in Wilmington. At about 2 o'clock in the morning, the rescue service received a call. An eyewitness reported a woman who was shot at near a condominium in the Peladon Club apartment complex. At this point, she was still alive. The paramedics arrived at the scene in a matter of minutes. We provided first aid to Olga, who was the victim of an attack. She was shot several times. The young woman suffered serious gunshot wounds and was bleeding profusely. The doctors urgently sent her to the hospital. Despite her desperate struggle for life, Olga died on the way to a medical facility. During the inspection of the crime scene, the police found another body next to the first victim. Joseph was lying in the bushes. He was instantly shot in the back of the head. It didn't look like a random robbery attempt. Rather, the couple was returning home, and they were purposefully attacked from behind. The detectives easily put together all the circumstances and information they had. The police officers realized that the previous robbery of their house could be connected with a tragic outcome that interrupted the happy love of a married couple. All the witnesses and neighbors of the victims who could provide some important information were immediately interviewed. Unfortunately, despite the fact that many people heard a series of pistol shots, no one saw the incident with their own eyes, so they could not give any clues to the investigators. They found witnesses who told of 2 loud male voices arguing with each other, heard shortly before the massacre began. It looked like there was some kind of conflict between the men and the couple, which ended with the death of the newlyweds. According to the timeline of events, it happened right after Joseph and Olga returned from the bar. On this day, Olga's 39th birthday was celebrated. Newlyweds, friends, and several members of the Spew family gathered for the holidays. They had fun and danced until they got tired, and then we went home after midnight. They parked their convertible near the sidewalk of the condominium and headed for the entrance, happy and contented, unaware that death was literally lurking in front of them. Olga had several gunshot wounds to her face at once. One of the bullets hit his cheek and exited the back of his head. Her husband was literally riddled with bullets. Several shots were fired into the body. The fatal hit was to the head. While the man was lying in the bushes near the path without signs of life, his wife was still fighting for her life and was waiting for help. When the police arrived to help her, they understood that all hope was in her. They tried to hear the name, at least some hint of the perpetrator, asking questions to the victim, but the woman did not respond. Nearby, the police found a large number of spent shell casings, so they confirmed the possibility that there could be several attackers. The fact is that there were shell casings of several different calibers. Accordingly, several types of weapons were used. It is unlikely that one criminal would shoot from different pistols. Moreover, about 25 bullets were fired in total. This means that there were several criminals, and they certainly acted. The police also managed to confirm that this was not a robbery almost immediately. After all, nothing was taken away from the victims of the attack. They had a wallet with a large amount of cash. The woman had a bag with her phone and valuables next to her, and on her finger was an expensive engagement ring worth several tens of thousands of dollars. After analyzing the incident, the police came to the conclusion that it was an ambush, a planned crime against a married couple. The newlyweds were purposefully ambushed near their homes and thoroughly riddled with bullets in order to leave no chance of survival. They seemed like a sweet, happy couple and didn't hurt anyone. But then what could be the motive for the crime? As soon as the investigation began, detectives contacted the relatives of the deceased and interviewed everyone. The police officers talked to Joe's mother, and his stepfather. They claimed that the couple had no enemies or detractors who could kill them. At least they've never heard of it. The couple did not tell them that they had problems with someone, but as we mentioned earlier, it was known to everyone close to Joseph that he had a conflict with his sister over the ring. Therefore, this information, of course, surfaced during interviews with relatives. Some believed that Kelly killed the couple because of the stones. Could the sister really hold a grudge against Joe to the extent that she decided to commit a double murder to get back at him? In any case, the ring was not missing, which was out of the question in this version. However, it seemed strange that the victim's sister, Kelly, was one of the first to arrive at the crime scene, as if she was somewhere nearby. Even though she lived in a different neighborhood, there was no face on it because of the tragedy. The sister actively communicated with the investigators, trying to help. Without shyness, she openly told the investigators about the problems they had faced with her brother in recent months. Moreover, the sister did not try to downplay what had happened. She honestly told about everything, and even showed the correspondence with angry messages that they had with each other, as well as with Olga. According to reports, it was obvious that Joe's wife suspected his sister of robbery, but she denied her involvement in this act, and also claimed that she was innocent of attacking the couple. It seemed that Kelly didn't really care about the alibi, but by this point, information had already been confirmed that the attacker was a man, and he had an accomplice. Detectives also learned that Kelly had been battling breast cancer for a long time and had recently undergone severe treatment, was recovering from it. It seemed that the woman physically did not have the strength to do such a thing. But despite this, the police still believed that Kelly could be involved in the incident in any way and considered her a suspect, although all the facts suggested otherwise. None of the interrogations managed to crack her. Nevertheless, she remained on the list of suspects for a long time because of an obvious motive: greed. At this stage, the detectives were still considering another fairly popular version of the murder due to jealousy. Perhaps one of Olga's or Joseph's exes was against their love relationship and wanted to kill a rival, or took revenge for a broken love. Investigators checked the spouse's former partners, but none of them aroused suspicion. Olga, except Joe, had no relationship with anyone in the United States. It's unlikely that some offended ex flew across the ocean for revenge or jealousy. Joe, in turn, had good relationships with his ex-girlfriends, and none of them wished him harm. They were already married and had no plans for a happy family man, so this version was ruled out. The puzzle turned out to be not so simple, and the investigators puzzled over the perpetrators of the tragedy. Detectives began to explore other scenarios, looking for enemies of the couple in love. However, both were pleasant and friendly people who did not get involved in potentially dangerous stories. The investigators were haunted by the ring, which became a bone of contention between the brother and sister. They assumed that this could be a significant motive for the crime. After that, The detectives turned to Joseph's sister's husband, whose name was Garrett. They believed that he could have committed a double murder because of the ring at Kelly's request. However, he had a reliable alibi and confirmed the alibi of his wife, who claimed that she was feeling unwell on the day of the murder and was resting after the procedures. It was at this moment that the man voiced the assumption that criminal cases could be involved in the death of the couple in love. Garrett doubted that Joseph had made his fortune in an honest way and thought that the deceased was involved in shady dealings. Nevertheless, there were witnesses who confirmed this version. They said that Joseph was indeed selling steroids from under the floor, the sale of which was prohibited, and making a lot of money from it. Moreover, some acquaintances suspected Joe's business partner Chris Rivers of committing a crime. One of his close acquaintances suspected Joe's business partner Chris Rivers of committing a crime, claimed that he had repeatedly spoken negatively against Joe. He even accused him of embezzlement once. This was partly due to the fact that the deceased was selling steroids through a general store. Chris had debts, but his partner was in no hurry to share the outside income with him, but took all the money for himself. So the detectives came to the doorstep of Joe's partner, named Chris. At that time, the men had been working together for more than 10 years. The partners literally started their activities together. "We started a business from scratch, were very close, and went through many difficulties over the years. But instead of the victim's grief-stricken friend, the police found Chris quite happy, who was not at all worried about what had happened, and it looked strange." The partner said that he was supposed to meet the newlyweds at the bar that night, but could not arrive on time because he was busy with business. Chris also said that there were many rumors about Olga, including such as a connection with the Russian mafia. This could explain the rather large incomes of the family. Chris hinted and pressed on the fact that Joe was not clean on his hands, provided the police with several possible directions at once to find the killers. Despite Chris's suspicions of dishonesty, all this had to be thoroughly checked. As a result, a certain connection was found between Joseph and the criminal world, which was confirmed by several people who knew the man at once. A couple of years before the marriage was registered, Joe went to prison because he was accused of illegal possession of weapons. The incident occurred in a bar. A scuffle broke out, and Joseph took a shotgun from his pickup truck and threatened the conflicting parties. He did not manage to reach the bar with a gun, as the police managed to arrive at the parking lot and detained the suspicious aggressor. As a result, he was convicted, and the man made new acquaintances in prison. He got close to some characters there who told him about the steroid trade. Joe did not forget about his friends even after his release, so he began to participate in the business of illegally selling medical drugs for sports. Joe was involved in criminal schemes. He was a fairly well-known businessman in this field, in addition to his main business. However, it was unknown if this could be a motive for the murder. Could Joseph have crossed someone's path in this shady business? And could the Russian mafiosi, who shared the business in America, really have been involved in this case? The detectives had to find out all this, finding out who could be the organizer or accomplice of this shady business. The detectives tracked down a man named Harry Cook. He worked in this city and was interested in becoming Joe's partner in a car dealership. By the time the victims died, he had invested more than $100,000 in the case, which could also have been a motive for the attack. In addition, Harry lived near the Connells, but he had a reliable alibi for the period of the attack, so the police reached a dead end. Continuing to communicate with business partner Chris Rivers, the police learned one interesting feature. The partner repeatedly referred to the suspicion that his dead friend was stealing money. The investigation checked the store's accounting documents, and it turned out that it was indeed suffering serious losses, despite its large income. As a result, he did not remain in the red. Expenses grew exponentially. It looked very suspicious. The money was going nowhere. It became obvious that someone was stealing money here. But during the investigation, it was established that Chris did it himself. Trying to find out where the money went, law enforcement officers received information about the opioid addiction of a business partner. Chris spent all his money on prohibition. He no longer had enough of his income. It turned out that he was stealing from the store, and therefore from his best friend, in order to freely purchase illegal substances. Thus, a new main suspect appeared, who could have a significant motive for committing a crime. It became known that Chris's addiction was already completely out of control. He used a lot of illegal drugs and couldn't stop at anything. The partner got into debt, stole from everyone he could. Lately, he's been having paranoid ideas more and more often. He said that they were chasing him and trying to kill him. Actually, in an attempt to hide the traces of the crime, Chris himself aroused suspicion in his person among the police. The first time he was arrested for possession of steroids was when he turned in his partner and reported their secret sale from under the store floor. The drugs were in an auto repair shop owned by Joe and Chris. He talked about them himself and referred to his deceased friend, who allegedly sold illegal drugs through their joint business and did not share the proceeds with him. Eventually, it turned out that Chris, not Joe, was selling them to cover his debts, which he had collected from serious people. The partner was accused of having a separate room for storing asteroids in the workshop, which he organized. The suspect admitted that he had indeed organized this business out of desperation, and Joe did not know about it. 2 more arrests were made later. At this stage, the alibi of the main suspect, Chris, began to confuse. He willingly provided detectives with footage from surveillance cameras that were taken outside and inside the house while he was there. They even checked that the time on the recording was not distorted, but the police did not believe him and felt some kind of trick. Then the detectives checked Chris's mobile phone, and it turned out that on the evening of the double murder, he had been calling a lot, much more than usual. Most of the calls were at the time when the couple was attacked. The call log was deleted on the phone, but law enforcement officers easily restored the call history. Shortly before his business partner was shot dead, his lover Chris River was in contact with a certain Josh Bay. As it turned out, he was a buyer of illegal steroids, which were distributed by Chris. In addition, he escaped with Chris's illegal substances. However, during the investigation, it was proved that Juju Bay did not pull the trigger, but nevertheless could have had something to do with the murder. On that fateful night, they made several calls to friends named Dominic and Aaron. It is likely that these two could be the people who sentenced the couple. In any case, the picture was that the victim's business partner was involved in the murder. He had a great debt, as well as a weighty motive based on hostility. He could have hired his illicit drug dealer Josh Bay to take out the newlyweds. However, instead of shooting himself, Bay hired 2 of his acquaintances. The scheme became more and more confusing. If the crime had gone like clockwork, that a business partner could receive $1 million, which was supposed to be a payment on Joe's life insurance. A similar policy was issued for each of the partners in the early stages of cooperation, when they were just starting their business. In the event of his partner's death, Chris could receive a large sum of money, which would be enough to solve all his problems and pay off his debts. However, he could not claim the payment due to the fact that his partner got married. Now, after the murder, Olga would have received the entire amount of the insurance payment, and he would have been left out of work. Thus, Chris Rivers had to remove 2 spouses at once, his successful friend and his beautiful wife, in order to gain sole access to the money. Indirectly, this version was confirmed by the specific dialogues that took place between the organizer and his accomplices on the night of the double murder. Joe's partner constantly wrote to his illicit substances dealer, Bay, to find out where he was and when he would return home. He was clearly worried about the success of the planned attack. The answers were also ambiguous. Detectives immediately seized 4 mobile phones from all the suspects involved in the double murder. The movements of mobile devices were analyzed using cell towers. It was possible to verify that on September 2013, the defendants in the case were in the vicinity of the shooting victims. The direct perpetrators, Dominic and Aaron, were located near the Connell house. Bay, who led the action, was constantly in touch with his client Chris elsewhere. CCTV footage that the main suspect referred to confirm his alibi played not only in his favor, they showed the strange behavior of a business partner, as he was constantly pacing back and forth in the apartment, nervous, not letting the phone out of his hands. At this moment, he was obviously waiting for an answer from the hired killer and was talking to him. All this quickly began to be confirmed. Josh Bay himself was particularly helpful in the investigation when he surrendered to the police during interrogation and agreed to a deal with the prosecution to mitigate the punishment. According to the man, Chris really asked him to kill his partner in the car shop and his wife. As payment, he immediately gave him a deposit of $5,000 and also promised to pay another $60,000 after Joe and Olga were dead. As part of the plea deal, he testified against Chris in court. Year after the cold-blooded massacre, Chris Rivers was charged with conspiracy to commit double murder. The other defendants in the case also appeared in court. The hearings began 19 months after the start of the investigation. Chris's plan really didn't work out, even though he thought it out pretty well. The guy hoped that the investigation would get confused and go the wrong way. Several possible directions have been proposed for this purpose. The victim's involvement in criminal schemes for the sale of steroids related to his past, which occurred shortly before the tragedy of the robbery, as well as a feud with his sister. All this could confuse the police, and they could find and arrest someone else. Fortunately, the law enforcement officers did not succumb to the tricks and got on the trail of the real killers. The police managed to prove that the robbery at the home of the victims was staged before the crime. It was also committed by Bay. The man entered the Connells' house on Chris's instructions. His main task was to find and steal a diamond engagement ring. In this case, law enforcement officers would definitely consider Kelly's sister the main suspect in the subsequent murder. However, the jewelry could not be found among the couple's jewelry. Therefore, the plan failed. During the trials, which took place separately and in parallel with the criminals, Aaron Thompson confessed to what he had done and received 2 life sentences on charges of double murder plus 45 years when it was proved that he was the one holding the weapon in his hands. Chris Rivers also received 2 life sentences plus 50 years as he was the instigator of the crime. His accomplice Dominic Benton was acquitted of murder charges. He did not shoot the couple, but he was convicted of conspiracy and aiding criminals. Dominic was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Josh Bay was sentenced to just 5 years for actively cooperating with the police. The victim's sister Kelly was seriously injured in this situation. At some point, the police really put pressure on her, trying to convict her of murdering her brother, and almost imprisoned the innocent woman. However, a woman could not commit a double murder. Of course, she was upset by the act of her mother and brother with the wedding ring, but this was nothing more than a reason for resentment and verbal sparring. At the funeral, the sister confessed that she loved her brother very much and was grieving with all her loved ones about the bereavement. If you liked my work, subscribe to the channel. Please like this video, and let's discuss this story in the comments. I recommend watching these videos. Thank you all, and bye.